Oh, righty tighty, folks. Today, got a funny little story for you. Not one of my customers, luckily, but customer of the not the shop owner, the business owner at the shop that I've been working in, doing his all of his like work trucks and personal vehicles and what have you, and the forklift. We'll get to the forklift. The forklift, yay! But I have a little story for you. The story goes like this. Guy pulls up in a Jeep Cherokee. He's got the top chopped off, and it's just the whole thing is rattle canned. Tells you something. He comes in and he's got in a box a catalytic converter. I'm like, okay, well, it's Southern Arizona. There's no emissions requirements. You're not required to put a cat in the system. If you don't have one, why specifically why are you putting one in? Most people like to remove cats. I don't. If the car came with it, I tend to try to emissions and safety equipment. If the car came with it, I try to tend to keep those things intact or replace them with something equivalent, right? My Civic has a catalytic converter, it has an O2 sensor, it has a muffler, etc., etc. So he's got a cat in a box. He's got a cat in a box with a cesium atom and a vial of poison. And I ask him, without trying to sound incredulous, I ask him as nicely as I can muster, like, any particular reason you're putting a cat back in it? It's an off-road vehicle, clearly. It's been rolled before, the body's all, squished up and everything. But it still runs and it drives. It has a transmission, some wheels, and that's all you need for an off-road vehicle, right? You just go out, have some fun, come back into town, drive your daily driver around. Why in particular he's sticking a cat back in? And he tells me that he's done some research. We'll let that statement soak in for a minute. He's done some research, which I'm all for. Do your research. Learn your things. I have learned that most of the time when people say they've done research, they haven't actually done any research. They saw one forum post on Reddit and called themselves an expert. He did some research. And the interwebs told him that he must have a catalytic converter installed, or the engine will not run correctly. Okay? Why exactly do you... How many O2 sensors do you have? Was my next question. I asked him, how many O2 sensors does the thing have? Because it's without the roof on it, I don't know like the Jeep grills well enough to call it. It looks like a 98, 99, 2000 body to me. And if I remembered right, those had one O2 sensor. The closed loop, narrow band, 4-pin O2 sensor that goes about on the manifold or just down from the manifold on the downpipe, or, somewhere near the engine prior to any emissions equipment. And he says there's just one O2 sensor. I'm like, you don't need a cat for the thing to run. So the complaint was that it runs like crap. That's the complaint. The complaint is that the engine runs like crap. And there's a check engine light. Couldn't get what the check engine light was, but the engine runs like crap. And the internet told him to make his engine not run like crap, put a cat on it. Sure, guy. So I get underneath with the guy that's going to be doing the job. He's going to be doing the job. I get underneath, and the O2 sensor's like 10 inches, maybe, from an open end of pipe. Also, the exhaust pipe is half crushed right at the downpipe flange, where the downpipe and the header meet. That flange, it's half crushed. Maybe because you're sucking fresh air into the exhaust pipe and your O2 sensor is reading that you're far richer than you should be because there's excess oxygen. So it's pulling back the fuel, and now you're lean burning, which American engines really don't like. Most especially inline sixes that don't fuel the end cylinders very well. It's fuel injected, so it fuels them equally. But the fueling to the end cylinders, because there's a single throttle body, is not the same as the center two cylinders because of the pulses from the intake valves in the intake manifold, right? So inline engines, the longer the inline engine gets, the more cylinders you have, the more inlets you need to really have on the intake system because of those pulses. I have a 4-cylinder in my Honda Civic, and the throttle body sits by cylinder number 4 on the plenum, on the intake manifold. And because of that, cylinder number 1, which is only 3 cylinders away on the intake, doesn't fuel correctly. I have to pull 4% of fuel because I'm getting 4% less airflow at very specific harmonic regions, mind you. But cylinder number 1 gets tons of fuel because it gets no air based off of the average of all the other 3 cylinders when they're running normally. So what do you think's happening on an inline 6? Granted, the throttle body, if I remember right, on those is in the center of the intake manifold, but still, the outer cylinders are going to fuel different than the inner cylinders. And when your O2 sensor is getting fresh air, that's a lot of oxygen. Oxygen reacts with heated zirconium and platinum and all the rhodium and whatever the hell else is inside the Nernst cells, and it creates a voltage up to 1.1 volts based on oxygen content. So the more oxygen, the higher the voltage. So the voltage spikes because you're getting a fresh air pulse back through the open end of the pipe. And now you're not actually reading what your engine is doing. You're reading nothing. You're dangling the O2 sensor somewhere outside the exhaust system, and you're not getting a correct reading, so you can't fuel correctly based on what the engine's actually doing. And it runs like crap. Most likely scenario is because it's pulling fuel because it thinks it's rich, and pulling fuel on cylinders that are already sort of lean anyway, just because inline engines work that way. Like I was saying before, the fueling is not even across them. Even with fuel injection, the fueling is not even across them because the O2 sensor, single O2 sensor, is averaging all of the cylinders together. So all those cylinders are running a little bit different from each other, right? So you're pulling enough fuel that you're getting lean misfires, which can burn holes in pistons and cylinders and heads and valves, and it's not good stuff. And thus it runs like crap. I try to intimate this knowledge to this gentleman and say, you don't really need a cat, you just need exhaust pipe. You need to move the O2 sensor closer to the engine, or extend the exhaust pipe so you're not sucking fresh air into the sensor sometimes. And then he tells me, no, I'm wrong. Obviously, I can't know anything about these engines because these engines in particular, this one exact engine from this one year or something, it must have a catalytic converter installed to run correctly. What does a catalytic converter do exactly? It's a catalyst. It has, again, platinum and cobalt, and I think there's some iridium in there, all on a zirconium substrate. Well, and generally, the good ones are on a zirconium substrate. ceramics. And they're bound to the metal in a honeycomb kind of pattern, and air passes through the honeycomb, and it catalyzes nitrous oxides to turn them into nitrogen gas and oxygen gas. Ideally. We're not going to get into the reality of it, but the ideal case is that you're turning nitrous oxides, which are, the brown of LA, into nitrogen gas, which is 63% of our atmosphere, and oxygen gas, which is 22%, whatever, of our atmosphere. The stuff we need to bleed. Red. Right? Oxygen. Rust. That's all a cat does. It runs 200 to 300 degrees hotter than the rest of the exhaust system because of that, because it's catalyzing chemicals, right? It's a chemical reaction that is exothermic. And then gases go out a little bit safer the other side of it. A lot of cars today, they have multiple catalytic converters to try to make those gases even safer, which I have thought about doing to the Civic, putting a pre-cat and a post-cat and putting in a second O2 sensor in between them, check cat health, or putting an O2 sensor after them and check cat health, I guess. But then there's a bunch of math and it's a lot of stuff. Not today, project. I'm trying to tell this guy that all he needs is a section of exhaust pipe, because what's happening is he's sucking fresh air back into the system during slow pulse events, right? Idle and low RPM. Specifically, right off idle, you get pulses that will suck big gulps of air back in. Ask me how I know. And it's effectively just an exhaust leak, and his O2 sensor isn't reading correctly because of it. Nope, I'm wrong. Obviously, I can't know that this engine in particular, it must have a catalytic converter to do. I never really got quite exactly what the cat's supposed to do for this engine that makes it run correctly, but the cat makes it run correctly. Absolutely. Sometimes explaining things to people is an exercise in futility. Sometimes explaining things to people will make you hated, despised. They get angry at you. Apparently, by the time the guy left, he wasn't really a big fan of mine. Not my job to be liked by everybody. It's my job is to try to educate people. Like, that is what I have taken it upon myself to do. Educate people. Which, funnily enough, I was just watching Heiss's latest video release, and he was talking about kind of almost exactly this type of situation, where I'm not here to say this guy is a moron and he has no business, blah blah blah, whatever mean things I could possibly think to say, and I can think of some mean things to say. I can. That's not the purpose of this here right now, right? I didn't. Whenever it became clear that he wasn't going to listen to anything that I had to say, that the information that I had was not of value to him, I walked away and I did something else. I wasn't going to continue trying. I wasn't going to continue interacting. I wasn't going to call him stupid or call him names, because that's not the grown-up thing to do. Grown-up thing to do is to let him be. Well, and that's kind of why we're in the situation in this country, on this planet that we're in today. It's because the grown-up thing to do is to walk away and let them be. I'm a firm believer in stupid should hurt. But, I guess, it is what it is. Takes effect in this situation. So, I walked away, I did something else. And then when he was gone, I asked some questions about the gentleman to the guy that was doing the job, because they deal with him on a fairly regular basis, I've gathered. And apparently, yeah, that's just exactly how he is. He comes in with some information he found that You can't tell him anything different. And he just wants this thing this way. And that's it. I will say, I have been that guy. I have been that guy. I know exactly what it's like. Having some piece of information in your head, and you're like, I've done hours and days and weeks and months of looking at this information and processing this information. And you're just like, anybody else tries to tell you, no, it doesn't work. And you just gotta do it yourself. You gotta break it yourself. That's what you have to do. You have to do it wrong and learn from your mistakes. At the end of the day, we're human. That's how we work. Cool. But he knows more than I do, I guess. Perhaps I'm the wrong one. Perhaps a catalytic converter absolutely can affect the running of a single O2, an upstream only O2 control system on an engine. Perhaps that's the case. My suspicion is that it was a combination of inline engines are very scavenging hungry. They like they like scavenging really, really well. Just something to do with the physics of inline engines. You can see it on V engines if you just take and put like what are those things called? Screamers? I don't know. It's headers, but all they are is single tubes that come out of the cylinders, just kind of point at the air. On a stock engine, right? Not a race engine, not a built engine, right? But on an OEM engine that is completely stock with a stock cams, it's all designed to be put in a Chevy Silverado or a Jeep Wrangler or a Dodge Charger, whatever, just a regular old street car. Okay. If you were to put straight tubes off of those and make them 12 inches long, I think it's going to run like crap. Because the engine's not built to run with that airflow characteristic. It's not. So in the stock 4.0, which is an inline 6 with a single header and a single collector and downpipe, right? Single pipe. Scavenging is going to be a fairly substantially important mechanism for the engine to run correctly. I've had the exhaust fall off the Civic before right at the collector, which is like right at the bottom of the engine. That's 30 inches of pipe down to the collector, maybe, from the cylinders, from the cylinder head. And it runs like crap. It don't run for crap. Even if the O2 sensor is up close to the head, and it's not sucking in fresh air and messing with the O2 sensor readings, it still runs like crap. Because you don't have that scavenging. And if you guys want it, if somebody asks, if somebody says in the comments, or, you know, get a new sub out of this video and they ask me in the comments, perhaps, I will probably, very likely, make a video kind of talking about scavenging and what it is, and trying to dispel some of the apparently still prevalent misconceptions and misinformation that exist about scavenging and back pressure. I have a feeling it was a combination of lack of scavenging, so you're going to have reduced power from it, and O2 sensor reading fresh air in the exhaust tract because of space between pulses, vacuum between pulses, sucking atmosphere back into the pipe, causing it to mix with the exhaust gases and not sending correct readings to the ECU to cause correct fueling in the engine to make the engine run correctly. And because what they did is they added the cat, they added 24 inches of pipe, and then they put a muffler on it. So now you've got 4 extra foot of pipe coming out of the engine. He's like, oh yeah, it runs better. Well, A, you're still running on your long-term fuel trims from not having an exhaust pipe, So you can't know that for sure. Not quite yet. It'll take a little bit. I was going to suggest he pull the battery and reset him, but I was like, nah, this guy knows what he's doing. He knows everything about his car. It's fine, we'll leave it. Because he really needs to reset the idle, reset the fuel trims. Sometimes you encounter people that they absolutely know what they're talking about, and you can't tell them anything else, even when you know they're wrong. And sometimes you know what you're talking about, but you're wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. Who knows? But if you found my story kind of funny, you could do that, the YouTube thing down there, down there just below, the like and subscribe thing. It's free for you, and it might get me to a point where I could make this my living. And I could give people information. I could teach people. Maybe I could do streams and do like teaching streams. And today's teaching stream is, back pressure 101. Haha, it's a joke. But we will see you guys in the next one. Thank you for joining us.